Hi, today we are going to present the analysis of the fiction elements and language of the short story The Birthmark of Nathaniel Hawthorne. Besides, we are going to expose some biographic and context aspects relating to the author. The group members are Lorena Castillo López, Sebastián Pineda Manrique, Charik Roa Bolaños, and Laura Rojas Lizarazo.
Nathaniel Hawthorne was born on July 4, 1804, in Salem, Massachusetts, where now his birthplace is a museum. William Hawthorne, who emigrated from England in 1630, was the first Hadowers as censors to arrive the colonies. After arriving, William persecuted Quakers. Hawthorne's father, Nathaniel Hawthorne Sr., was a sea captain who died in 1908 of yellow fever, when Hawthorne was only 4 years old. He married Sophia in 1842. They moved to the Old Manse in Concord, Massachusetts, where they lived for 3 years. There were wrote most of the Tulls collection in Moses from Old Manse.
Hawthorne stands among the leading figures of American history who started his literary career at a young age and enjoyed fame during his lifetime. After graduation, his first novel made a public appearance. On one hand, he published around 5 works, where the most important one is The Scarlet Letter. Likewise, he published his 19 short stories collection, and one of the most important ones is the Birthmark, published in 1843. On the other hand, after 1860, tried to strive to rekindle his early productivity. He found little success. Drafts were mostly incoherent and left unfinished. Some even show signs of psychic regression.
The genre of dark romanticism is thought to have emerged from the transcendental movement in the 19th century in America. Dark romantics focus on human fallibility, self destruction, judgment, punishment, as well as the psychological effects of guilt and sin. Hawthorne's works belong to dark romanticism because he wrote cautionary tales that suggest that guilt, sin, and evil are the most inherent natural qualities of humanity. A historical event related with Nathaniel Hawthorne's literary period was the Industrial Revolution in the United States. The Industrial Revolution came to the country as an echo of the Industrial Revolution that occurred in Great Britain and Europe in the late 18th century. It revolutionized the economy, society, and lifestyle, and workers carried the greatest weight of change.
The scientific revolution took place between the mid-16th century and the end of the 18th century, putting the action of the birthmark near the end of this period. And we also know that this time was marked by an increase in scientific work and discoveries in Europe, and it overlapped with the European Enlightenment in the 18th century. And the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment both placed particular importance on the values of rationality and empirical investigation. And it is also remarkable that these scientific developments were sometimes seen as hostile to established religion because the purpose of the views of the world did not necessarily fit with the teachings of the Bible.
Point of view. In the short history, there is a third person narrator who is omniscient because the storyteller knows the thoughts, feelings, and motives of Elmer, Georgiana, and Aminadab. Also, the narrator exposes what the characters say and do, and readers can identify it through the third person pronouns as the next quotation exemplifies. Do you remember, my dear Elmer? Said she, with a feeble attempt at a smile. Have you any recollection of a dream last night about this odious hand?
Setting, time, in a specific part of the century. We have in the later part of that of century on page number 5, time period, making a contextualization on what was happening on these days. We have in those days when the contemporarily recent discovery of electricity and other kindred mysteries of nature seemed to open paths into the region of miracle on page number 5. Specific place when the author made reference to the Aylmer laboratory. We have they were to schedule themselves in the expensive apartments occupied by Aylmer as a laboratory, and where, during his toilsome youth, he had made discoveries in the elemental powers of nature that had roused the admiration of all the learned societies in Europe, on page number 9. Socioeconomic. Aylmer had converted those smoking, dingy, somber rooms where he had spent his brightest years in recondite pursuits into a series of beautiful apartments, not unfit to be the scheduled about of all lovely women.
Three characters. The main one, Elmer, is a dynamic and brown character. Elmer is the story protagonist, is Georgiana's husband. We know that he's an accomplished scientist with a really high intelligence and a singular ability to affect the natural world. Although his intentions are good, we know that Elmer became into a cruel and a selfish man along the story. Secondly, we got Georgiana. She's a round and dynamic character. She's the antagonist of the story and Elmer's wife. She's an intelligent, beautiful, obedient, charming, and overall a caring woman. And she's physically attractive and her beauty is almost perfect, but she's going to become into the antagonist because even when she's so beautiful, she has a small reddish birthmark that has the shape of a hand. This birthmark is going to drive crazy her husband, and she's going to become into the antagonist for this reason. The third character is Aminadab. He's an static and flat character. He plays the role of the foil because he's going to do a contrast with the protagonist. It is because he's really connected with the natural world, and for this reason, he's going to express that they shouldn't remove Georgiana's mark.
Plot. The plot of the short story is divided in first, exposition. It is introduced Elmer, a brilliant scientist, and his wife Georgiana. Second, the rising action. Elmer becomes upset with Georgiana's birthmark. He is the only person who finds the mark disturbing. Elmer considers that her almost perfect face is what makes the mark so shocking. So he wears his wife down and she agrees to let him to remove it. Third, climax. The couple moves to their apartment. There, Georgiana reads the various aspects of her husband's profession, and she realizes that all his experiments never work. Fourth, the falling action. Without hesitation, Elmer comes up with a potion which he believes will cure Georgiana and make her perfect. And finally, the resolution. Georgiana drinks the potion and the mark fades. However, she too fades with the mark.
Conflict. In the history, there is one type of conflict that prevails during the history and creates a sense of fiction. This is man versus man. It is in the history because Almer wanted to remove Georgina's birthmark without telling her the consequences that it could have, as we can notice in the following quote. Why do you come hither? Have you not trust in your husband? Cried he impetuously. Would you throw the blade of that fatal birthmark over my livers? It is not well done. Go, pray, woman, go.
Irony, verbal irony, because Georgiana exaggerates when she fainted due to the process of removing the birthmark. We have When Georgiana recovered consciousness, she found herself breathing an atmosphere of penetrating fragrance, the gentle potency of which had recalled her from her deadline fitness. On page number 10, situational irony. This is expressed in which Aylmer does not pay attention to the perfect beauty that characterizes Georgiana. Dramatic irony. The irony is because we expected that Georgiana drinks Aylmer's elixir and the liquid will remove the birthmark, but she dies.
Theme. In the history, there are three main themes. The first one is mortality. The birthmark is a symbol that represents that each human being is flawed and mortal, therefore we are destined to die, as we can notice in the following quote. The crimson hand expresses the inalienable grave on which mortality clutches the highest and purest of earthly mold. The second one is science versus nature. Ulmer cannot accept Georgina as nature made her. For that reason, he decides to use his scientific knowledge to remove that imperfection of nature. As we can notice in the following quote, nature is one shape or another stands ineffaceable on all her productions, either to imply that they are temporary and finite, or that their perfection must be wrought by toil and pain. The third one is perfection. Ulmer becomes obsessed with making Georgina absolutely perfect that her imperfect Birthmark comes to blind him to everything else about her, as we can notice in the following quote. In this manner, selecting it as the symbol of his wife's liability to sign, sorrow, decay, and death.
Symbolism. The first symbol is the birthmark, symbolizes Georgiana's mortality and also this particular characteristic of human being, human imperfections. Another symbol is the plant, that symbolizes a natural product that human wants to manipulate it in order to give the control about his healing properties.
As you can see on the quotation, Aylmer's experiment failed. And just as all Aylmer's experiments, we can know that along the story, all of them are going to end up in a destructive and unintended way. That's the way the author uses those experiments to give the reader a clue, so the reader can know that Georgiana is going to die at the end of the story. That's the way the author uses foreshadowing.
Structure. In the short history, there is a chronological structure due to the fact that it exposes Elmer and Georgiana's story from the beginning and develops it describing chronological events which happen through time. For instance, the next quotation is how it starts the birthmark story that is going to be developed sequentially. In the later part of the last century, there lived a man of science, an eminent proficient in every branch of natural philosophy, who not long before our history opens had made experience of a spiritual affinity more attractive than any chemical one.
Dialogue. There are reproductions of conversation between all the characters, as we can notice in the following quote. It is magical, cried Georgina. I dare not touch it. Nay, pluck it, answered Ulmer.
Allusion. In the birthmark, there are two kinds of allusion. First, mythological references. Elmer used mythological references when he wanted to compare his cure for Georgiana's birthmark with creations of mythological characters. Even Pygmalion, when his sculptured woman assumes life, felt no greater ecstasy than might well be. The quotation shows Elmer alluding to Pygmalion, a legendary figure from Cyprus. Second, historical references. There are historical references when Georgiana reads Elmer's books. In many dark old tomes, she met with chapters full of romance and poetry. They were the works of philosophers of the Middle Ages, such as Albertus Magnus, Cornelius Agrippa, Paracelsus, and the famous friar who created the prophetic brazen hat.
Tone. Nathaniel Hawthorne used a pointedly moralistic tone. In the story, the author showed through us his natural tone, his purpose of making readers reflect of the story theme regarding to the morals we have. Thus, ever does the gross fatality of earth exult in its invariable triumph over the moral scene which, in this time sphere of high development, demands the competences of a higher state. Yet, had Aylmer reached profounder wisdom, he need not thus have flagged away the happiness which would have woven his mortal life in the self-same texture with the celestial. The momentary circumstance was too strong for him. He failed to look beyond the shadowy scope of time, and living once for all the eternity, to find the perfect future in the present. On page number 19, the quotation exemplifies the author's attitude who is concerned with moralizing readers.
Mood. There is a gothic mood in the short history, magic and alchemy, vials of poison, and the flower that dies with Georgina's touch are all characteristics of the Gothic literature writing during the Romantic period in the 19th century, as we can notice in the following quote. But Georgina had no sooner touched the flower than the whole plant suffered a blight, its leaves turning coal black as if by the agency of fire.
The Birthmark, the language of fiction.
It is possible to understand the author's style through this piece of quotation. "Oh, upon another face perhaps it might," replied her husband. We can know that the author wrote the story in the third person and the past tense, and the narrative shifts perspectives between Aylmer and Georgiana.
Simile. In this case, it is a comparison between the crimson hand and a bas-relief of ruby on the widest marvel about the way in which the crimson hand is very remarkable. We have a myth which the crimson hand was brought strongly out, like a bas-relief of ruby on the widest marble, on page number 7. Now, in this case, this is a comparison in which both a entity and a mother are the same entity, humans. We have, she permit us, indeed, to mar, but seldom to mend, and, like a jealous parentee, no on no account to make, on page number 9.
Along the story, we can see the author has a wide use of metaphors. We got here two examples. The first one: watch the stain of the rainbow fading out the sky, and you will know how that mysterious symbol passed away. So, the mysterious symbol refers to the birthmark, and it is being compared with a rainbow fading out the sky. In the second example, we have: when she blushed, it gradually became more indistinct, and finally vanished, amid the triumphant rush of blood that bathed the whole week with its brilliant glow. So the rush of blood refers to the red color of the birthmark. We know this because it bathed the whole cheek, the place where the birthmark was exactly located.
Personification. In the birthmark, Nathaniel Hawthorne uses personification to give the birthmark human characteristics as the next quotation exemplifies. The crimson hand expressed the ineludible grave in which mortality clutches the highest and purest of earthly mood. So, the crimson hand can express something as a human. Also, throughout the story, Hawthorne personifies nature as the creator of all life and one Elmer's enemies. Here, too, at an earlier period, he had studied the wonders of the human frame and attempted to fathom the very process by which nature assimilates all her precious influences from earth and air, and from the spiritual world to create and foster man, her masterpiece. The quotation shows how nature is personified as a woman who purposely assimilates all her precious influences from earth and air, in order to assist humankind, which is her finest creation.
Sensory language. In the story, there are three types of imagery that helps the reader's mind to recreate the scene. The first one is visual imagery. In this part, the narrator introduces the character of a minaret in the story, as we can see in the following quote. Forthwith there issued from an inner apartment a man of low stature but bulky frame, with shaggy hair hanging about his visage, which was green with the vapors of the furnace. The second one is olfactory imagery. It happens due to the atmosphere of penetrating fragrance, as we can notice in the following quote. When Georgina recovered consciousness, she found herself breathing an atmosphere of penetrating fragrance, the gentle potency of which has recalled her from her death-like fineness. The third one is auditory imagery. In this part, the narrator describes the sound of footsteps, as we can notice in the following quote. The sound of her husband's footsteps aroused her.
For further information on the video, you can learn much more about Nathaniel Hawthorne during the first 20 minutes. Then, after minute 35, there is more information about the birthmark. You should click on the link below.
So, thank you very much for your attention. We hope you enjoyed the presentation and learned about the fiction elements and language of the birthmark and Nathaniel Hawthorne's life.